morning, and welcome to Issues That Matter. I'm your host, Robert Piccone, and on today's show, we have a wonderful guest, and a guest who wears a lot of different hats, all of which, for one reason or another, are serving people very well. So with that, Dylan Volk, welcome.
Thanks. Derek, Dylan's my son. Happens all the time.
I always mess up on the introduction. That's one of the few things that I'm consistent
People
about.
get us confused
I mess up
all
on the
the time.
Maybe it's because I think of Dylan Volk with such familiarity, you might say.
Well, he's the star. He's the star of the show anyway.
Okay, then let's talk about Dylan for a moment.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, Dylan has Asperger's syndrome.
He does.
And what were as a father, obviously you have challenges when you're raising a child with Asperger's syndrome. What were some of the challenges that you found to be most significant?
Well, probably the biggest challenge that we had was just not understanding what was driving a lot of his behaviors. When Dylan was first diagnosed, well, when he was 2, I came home from work and my wife sat me down. She said, "Something's not quite right with Dylan." I said, what do you mean? She said, "I don't know, but something's not right." So I went to the immediate dad default, which is, "Oh, no, he's fine, there's nothing wrong with him." And she said, no, there's something's off. And I said, well, what would make you say that? And she said, well, when there's other boys over the house for play dates or whatever, they interact and communicate, and Dylan doesn't. She said, it's like he doesn't care or even pay any attention to whether they're even in the room or not, and it just doesn't seem right to me. Now, he was 2. We didn't really know what to do with it. My next response to that was, well, that's just because he's way smarter than those kids. And that in my head, that made perfect sense. Dylan is a very smart young man now, and he was a very smart and unusual little boy. He was obsessed with vacuum cleaners at 2. His favorite Christmas gift at 2 years old was a photo album full of vacuum cleaner photos. And he, for example, he got to about 16 words when he was, 10, 15 words when he was, in the 20-month range, 15 to 20-month range. And then he basically just stopped adding words for months. One day I was putting him to bed. He was probably, a little over 2 months and, 2 years and maybe 3 or 4 months. And he pulls a book down. He says, "How about this book?" And I was like, "What?" And he says, "How about we read this book tonight?" And he went from speaking like 10 words to full grammatically correct sentences the next day. And not sentences that like only the parents and the siblings understand. Like his diction was clear as can be. He talked like he was 16 years old. So as time went on, and there's a lot of stories in the book that explain it, but finally at 8 years old, he was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. And at that point, we thought, oh, great, now we're going to be able to get some help, right? Because now we have a diagnosis. Because we'd gone through diagnosis after diagnosis. None of them made sense. But the problem was it was the late 90s, and Asperger's wasn't even a diagnosis until 1994. Nobody knew anything about it. And they really didn't know how to help him. He was the first one they saw at his school. He was the first one that they saw at summer camps. I mean, people just didn't know what to do with Dylan, and we didn't know what to do with Dylan. And he got more and more frustrated by that, and that led to more and more difficult behaviors and isolation and so forth and so on.
Well, there's no question, no doubt. It's got to be a challenge for you. No doubt about that.
It is. It's a difficult situation for us, and people always would say, "Oh my gosh, it must be so hard, raising Dylan." And I say, "Yeah, it is, but it's a lot harder being Dylan." Yep. Being Dylan is a lot harder than raising Dylan. Dylan when we do our presentations, we've now, since the book came out and now Dylan's book is out, we've done presentations all around the country. We've done over 100 of them around the country. And Dylan always says, the expression, "Don't judge a man till you walk a mile in his shoes"? He says, "Forget about my shoes." He said, "Try spending an hour in my head You'll be looking for the fastest track out there. And that's the way he sees the world. It's very difficult to be Dylan.
It's almost like he's always one step ahead.
Or one step behind.
And sometimes it's probably difficult to determine which.
It is, yes.
Because if you're one step ahead, the normal person will probably from a self-defense mechanism say, you're one step behind.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the reason I call the book Chasing the Rabbit is because I always describe Dylan as a greyhound and the rabbit is normal. So if you go to a greyhound race, the dogs come in, they let him out of the chute, and they chase this mechanical rabbit around the track. They never catch the rabbit. And the analogy I use is that Dylan is the rabbit and Dylan is the greyhound and the rabbit is normal. He sees it. He knows exactly what it looks like. He has 3 sisters, so he sees it every single day, but he just can't catch it, no matter how much he tries.
How did that play into his relationship with his sisters?
Well, it's interesting. He has a very good relationship with his sisters, but it had its ups and downs. And I have 3 daughters that are 4, 5, and 6 years apart, and so Dylan's 12 years from his youngest sister. So their relationship is very different from the one that he's 2.5 years apart from. So they each have a very different relationship with Dylan because they had different life experiences with him. The younger one didn't really, she was 6 when he moved out of the house, when he graduated from high school and moved out. And so she only has lived with Dylan for periods of time here or there. Whereas my oldest one, she was a year, 2 years behind Dylan in school. So she was in the hallways with Dylan, she was in high school with Dylan, and she has a very different experience. There's a fantastic, if anybody, I always tell people this, it's the most watched video we have on YouTube. If anybody has a kid with autism and there's a sibling involved, or if you have a sibling with autism, go to my website, chasingtherabbit.org, go to the speaking tab, and watch the video of Dylan and his oldest sister, Mariah. He's the oldest sister that he has. Dylan's the oldest in the family, and then I have 3 girls. The 2 of them were the keynote speaker at the Southern Maine Autism Conference in 2016, and it is just a fantastic presentation about what it's like to be the sibling of somebody with Asperger's and what they went through and the ups and downs. It's really touching. And at the end, Mariah talks about how she actually reads part of her college essay where she writes about how because of Dylan, she's who she is. She learned love from Dylan, patience, understanding, empathy. She got all that from Dylan. And now she's about to graduate from law school and is going to practice juvenile law, wants to do some work in juvenile justice. And that's because of Dylan. She started going to do prison ministry when she was 16. And she walked into Long Creek Youth Facility in South Portland, and everybody's like, "Are you Dylan's sister?" So that was the first wake-up call for her.
It speaks to the thought that if one were to scratch the surface of what they might perceive to be a problem today, if one were to scratch the surface, they can find something positive to come out of that problem.
Yeah.
Which changes the whole perspective.
Yeah, you can, the expression, you can make lemonade out of the most sour lemons. It's interesting that people, I believe that everything we went through with Dylan was because these books were supposed to be written. I believe in God. My book started because I heard God's voice tell me to write it. It's the only time in my life I ever heard God's voice. I'm convinced that's what it was. I had sat down to write a business book, and I heard a voice. It wasn't audible, but it wasn't Morgan Freeman or anything like that. But it sounded real.
It's like your head was a thing flashing in your mind. Write a book.
Yep. It's the exact words were, "That's not the book you're supposed to be writing. You're supposed to write a book about Dylan." Those were the exact words I heard. And I wrote the book. It's extremely raw, like people call it brutally raw. It basically tells you everything we went through. I don't hold anything back because I didn't think anybody was ever going to read it.
Is this the book?
That's the book. I figured when I tell Dylan I wrote this book, he's going to be like, there's no way you're telling everybody all those things. And that would be the end of it. And if he didn't shoot it down, I thought my wife would shoot it down. She was a state politician at the time, and she would be like, you can't tell everybody all this stuff. And she's still a little uncomfortable about how open the book is, about what we went through, what my most inner feelings were. But we've been able to share this book all around the country. We've done over 100 presentations. We're booked right now to go to Savannah, Florida, Oklahoma, Missouri. We just booked one for Minneapolis. I believe that everything we went through was because this was part of God's plan. It was part of God's plan for us to share this story to help other families. And the impact that it's had on other families has absolutely blown my mind. It's nothing I ever in a million years would have anticipated.
Give me some examples, if you can.
Sure. So I was at a conference actually here in Portland, and I spoke about how for a long time I was angry at Dylan. I didn't like him because he ruined what I thought my family was going to be. We couldn't have friends over. We couldn't go out with another family as a group because we never knew when Dylan would have a meltdown or say something that would be very embarrassing. So it was very isolating, and it was very frustrating, and it was exhausting. We often spent 90% of our time and energy with 25% of our children. So I was frankly pretty ticked at. I was resentful. And it took me a long time to get through that. Someone gave me great advice one time. They said I had to mourn the son that I thought I was going to have so I could love the one that God gave me. And it took a long time to get through that mourning to the point where I liked Dylan. I've always loved him. He's my son. Mm-hmm. But to like him is different. And it took a long time to get through that. So I talked about that. A gentleman came up after, and he was from Millinocket. He had tears running down his cheeks. And he said, I'm so angry at my son. And I didn't realize it until you put words to it. But I'm really angry at him. What do I do? Now, this was the first presentation we'd ever done. So I'm not a counselor. I'm like, dude, I don't know what to do. And I said, look, I don't know how you do it, but just look at it this way. His son was 9. I said, your son's 9. My son was 23 before I got through this. So you're way ahead of where I was. So cut yourself some slack and just start working through it. A year later, he had another son who was 7 that was perfectly normal, did everything that he liked to do, go fishing, hunting, baseball, the kid that he always wanted. So a year later, we're at that same conference, the one where Dylan and Mariah were the keynote speakers, and they asked at lunch if we could sit down, and they were going to have tables with different topics. So there was a middle school topic, a kindergarten topic, a dad topic. So there was a table that said dads only. So they said, would you sit at the table and kind of facilitate the discussion? So I said, sure. So I sit down and I look across, and guess who's there? The same guy, same Bruins hat, right across from me. So we go around the room, and it comes to him, and we go around the table, and it comes to him, and he says, you probably don't recognize me. And I said, I recognize you. And he said, I'll tell you, I came up and talked to you about how angry I was with my son, and for the last year, I mourned the son that I thought he was going to be. And now, on a sunny day with a beautiful lake outside, I will go in the basement and play Legos with him for 2 hours, and I don't feel like there's any place else I should be. And I was like, I got in the car after. I said to my wife, I never in a million years thought that this book would have that kind of impact. I get emails and, letters saying I changed people's whole family dynamic. Sometimes it's overwhelming. but it's a blessing. Would I do it again? That's the question. People often say, so, this is great, and I say, yeah, it's all great now, but what used to drive me crazy is we would go to these support groups, and people would say, oh, Timmy's driving us crazy. He keeps getting kicked out of school. He's kicking holes in the wall. And my husband and I are fighting all the time. We never have any time for our other kids. And my husband's sleeping on the couch. We're probably on the verge of a divorce. But I wouldn't change Timmy for anything. And I think, really? You wouldn't change Timmy? This is working for you. You'd like Timmy just the way he is. And I get it. They feel so guilty about how they feel about Timmy that it's easy, and there is no Timmy. I'm making that up for anybody who might be watching and has a kid named Timmy and think I'm talking about them. They feel so guilty about how they actually feel about Timmy that by saying that they love him, that they wouldn't change anything, it relieves the guilt. And I'll tell you something. I talked to Dylan about that one time, and I said, what would you do? I told him the whole Timmy story. I said, what would you do if I had a magic wand and I said, you know what? I'm not going to pull it out. I'm going to keep you just the way you are because you're special. And he goes, I would never forgive you. I would never forgive you for that. If you could make my life easier and you kept that wand in your back pocket, I don't think I could ever forgive you. So it's okay to say, I don't really like what happened. I don't like the situation. Sometimes I don't like my kid. One lady sent me a nasty email one time because in the book I mentioned at one point that I really didn't like Dylan. I might have even used the word hated Dylan. And she thought that was awful. And I said, well, did you read the whole book? Because I think if you read the book in its entirety, you'll see that I love my kid. But there were times where I didn't like him at all. And I just told somebody recently, I was on a podcast interview and I said this for the first time, it never even occurred to me. I said, it's so nice now to be happily sad when I leave Dylan. So when Dylan and I go to a conference and he gets on one plane to go to Los Angeles and I get another plane to go to Maine, I'm so happy that I'm sad. Because for a long time, I was just thrilled if the kid was in another room, much less another state. And now it feels so good to feel sad that Dylan's leaving.
And I think, I suspect a significant piece of that good feeling that you get is the fact that you are leaving your son, who you know, or you very strongly sense, he is capable of taking care of himself now. He doesn't need me like he needed me when he was a child.
Right.
He's a functioning adult these days.
Yeah.
Which is a testament to what I've done, to what I and my wife have done. Because we were significant in the formation of that foundation that he is working with right now.
Yeah, I suppose. I never really thought of it that way, but...
Well, I'm good at thinking things in
yeah. I mean, yeah. I'm sure that the things that we did and over the time, and we made a lot of mistakes, and if you read my book, Chasing the Rabbit, you'll read that I don't hold back on the mistakes that we made. If you read Dylan's book, you'll definitely read the mistakes that I made. And whenever I hand someone Dylan's book, and as you can see, I'm obnoxiously promoting it. There it is. And you can get it at volkbooks.com, V-O-L-K books.com. You can buy both of our books there and get a package deal if you buy both of them. And his book, Bad Choices Make Good Stories, My Life with Autism. I always joke when I hand people Dylan's book, I say, feel free to throw away the Parent of the Year application as you're reading it. It doesn't necessarily portray us in the greatest light, but you know what? It is what it is. Dylan's incredibly brave for putting himself out there, and I'll tell you, you know what? For a kid who, other than my book, hasn't read a book in probably 20 years, he wrote one heck of a book.
As many people who watch this show often, which I hope there are some, they know one of my thoughts is that I was a sales manager for a multinational insurance company. And my philosophy then was that if you have a sales representative who's not making mistakes, they're not working hard enough.
Very true.
if you're sales and you're doing everything you should be doing, you're going to make mistakes.
Yes.
And if you're not making mistakes, then you're not doing everything you should be doing.
Or you're not taking any risks.
And you can say the same thing about parenting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I tell the same thing to my sales reps. Take the order. The worst thing that can happen is we run the order and we lose a little money and we figure it out later. But if you got it, somebody's about to hand you an order, take the order. And you got to take some risks, right?
Yep, that's right. How many times did Thomas Edison think he had the light bulb invented?
They say over 10,000.
That's right.
And they asked him, how did you feel about failing 10,000 times? He said, I didn't fail 10,000 times. I learned 10,000 ways to not make a light bulb.
Exactly right.
Yep, I love that one.
I do too.
Yeah.
Like I said earlier, we have a lot in common.
Yeah, I tell my sales reps all the time, look, this isn't, if you make a mistake, nobody's dying. We're not doing heart surgery here. You know, we're not doing anything. We're making boxes. So make the decision. If you make a mistake, we'll learn from it, and you can go back to the customer and call me the bad guy and tell them, I tried to do it, but you know Derek. Blame it on me. I'm fine. And but make the call. Make the call.
Now let's talk about Asperger's syndrome for a second.
Okay, sure.
A little bit more technical. Now I have multiple sclerosis, and it is a firm belief of mine. It's not yet proven, as far as I know. It's a firm belief of mine that there is a genetic predisposition to multiple sclerosis. Do you think genetics factors into Asperger's?
Well, I'm certainly no doctor. I don't even play one on TV. But they say that there's a genetic factor to it. We've looked in our family and haven't found anybody that would fall in on the spectrum. Maybe a couple people, but I think it was more influenced by other things in their life. I believe there's a lot of people who believe it's based on the MMR shots, the measles, mumps, rubella shot that kids got at 2, and that's why there's this huge upgrade in thimerosal, Pitocin, which I write about in my book. There's a theory about Pitocin, and when Dylan was born, they had the Pitocin jacked up to as high as it could go, and then later came in and raised it. And I was thinking, didn't the other nurse say that it can't go any higher? But I just wanted that baby out, so what do I know? I'm like, all right, well, I won't say anything. And they're wearing white coats, and I'm a 21-year-old kid. What do I know? So there is a connection to Pitocin, according to some people. My personal belief is that there was some predisposition in Dylan, and when he was born, because of the way he came out he came out the wrong way, and which caused a lot of back labor for my poor wife, who was amazing during the process. And he came out and he looked like Dan Aykroyd from the old Saturday Night Live. I mean, his head was like, and you will never convince me that didn't have an impact. And actually, there have been a couple people over the years that say that, yeah, Dylan clearly has Asperger's because he has the special interests and a lot of the other typical Asperger autism. Now they call it high-functioning autism. Asperger's technically isn't a diagnosis anymore. But they said that he presents more like someone with a head injury, which goes right to my theory that he had a head injury at birth. Will I ever know? No. I don't spend a lot of time worrying about it because what's the difference?
I was just going to say, is it really important?
No. And there's books this thick about all the different theories and other books about this theory that are this thick, and I haven't read any of them because that's for somebody else to figure out, way smarter than me. And so let them figure that out. I just got to worry about my own kid.
Now, if there's one thing that you wanted to say about Asperger's syndrome that you wanted to drill into people's minds, I'm a new parent to a child, and the child is displaying these awkward behaviors, you might say. What would be that one thing to say?
All right, I'm going to give you 2. I'm going to give you one
from
me.
2 for 1. I got a good deal.
2 for 1. That's a good deal.
2 for 1.
I'm going to give you 2. I'm going to give you one from me and one from Dylan. Okay, and they're kind of both from Dylan actually. But one is, most of the time when that child is angry and it's manifesting itself as real anger, a meltdown, which is like a temper tantrum on steroids. It's frustration. It's not anger. They're not really angry. They're frustrated because they don't understand something. There's something about whatever's happening, or maybe that happened 3 hours earlier, and then something that broke the camel's back, and they're frustrated, and they don't know how to deal with that frustration. Tony Attwood, who wrote a lot of books about Asperger's, we went to see him speak one time, and he gave a terrific analogy. He said, your brain is like a computer. Picture your brain like a desktop, and there are a bunch of folders on it. And when you double-click a folder, it gives you choices of how to behave in certain situations. So there's a folder that says frustration, and you double-click it, and it says, go take a walk, have a discussion, whatever, have a drink, whatever. When Dylan double-clicks frustration, nothing there. It's blank. It's an empty folder. There's a chapter in my book called Empty Folder. And so just keep in mind that folder is empty. And so when they show frustration, they're oftentimes not really angry, they're just frustrated. Dylan said people always told him what was going on and thinking that was going to help him. And this is in his book. What he really needed to know is why. Yeah, I know I don't have any friends. That's the what. I don't have any friends. Why don't I have any friends? I need to know the why. Yeah, we're not doing this, so this isn't going to happen the way you wanted it to. Why? Tell me why. If I can understand the why, then I can understand it better. So that's one. And number two from Dylan is, because Dylan says in the presentations that we do, and if you go to volkbooks.com, which is leads you right to Dylan's page. It's also badchoicesmakegoodstories.com, but Volk Books is easier to say. There's a video on there that we did. It's like a TED Talk that we did in Denver last summer. And Dylan says, if there's one thing I could tell you about high-functioning autism, if I could put it in one sentence, it's autism causes poor decision-making. And that has been the cause of many, many of Dylan's problems. It's been the cause of him losing a lot of jobs, losing friends, losing a lot of getting arrested. It comes down to he made bad decisions. And the presentation that he did in Denver, that's on his website, he says it's all about how he lost this job. He got a job at a camp for people with disabilities, and so he's like, great, I'm working at a camp for people with disabilities. That's perfect. He's like, so now I'm going to tell you how you can get fired because of your disability. So he got fired at a camp for people with disabilities because of his disability. And people say, well, that's not legal. You can't get fired because of your disability. And he says, that's true. You can't. But you can get fired because you make bad decisions. And oftentimes those bad decisions are because of the disability. But there's no direct correlation. So he makes a bad with
the bad ending.
He makes a bad decision. He can't explain that directly he can't prove that that's because of the autism. But without the autism, would he have made that decision? Probably not. So they fire him over the bad decision making, the poor judgment, not because of the disability. Perfectly legal. And he's 27 years old and he's had almost 40 jobs. And he's been fired from every one of them.
And then that raises a question in my mind. Perfectly legal? Yes. But was it the right thing to do?
No.
I don't think so.
No. They made the same mistake and they admitted it later. They made the same mistake that a lot of people make about Dylan, because he presents so well. If you watch Dylan, if you talk to Dylan one-on-one, if you interview him on the show, he'll say some things that are kind of off the wall because there's not much of a filter there. But he presents so well, and he can fake normal really well, especially like in job interviews, that people underestimate his disability. They underestimate the impact that his disability has on his life. So unlike somebody in a wheelchair or somebody with a clear, visible disability, Dylan's disability is invisible. And so I always describe it as Dylan is like the really tall 4-year-old, and everybody treats him like a 7-year-old, but he's not 7, he's 4. So then when he acts like a 4-year-old, people get annoyed, and people forget, no, he's not 7, he's 4, he just is really tall. So people try to treat him like a 7-year-old, but he's just a 4-year-old. And that's what happens with Dylan. People underestimate the day-to-day impact that his disability has on every single part of his life is impacted by his disability.
And that's still is present today.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
You have your background. I mean, you're an entrepreneur, you're an author, you're the father of a child with a significant disability. You wear a lot of hats. How do you manage to maintain your level of effectiveness with wearing all those various hats?
I'm not sure I do it all well. I could probably do it a lot better if I didn't wear so many hats. For the first time in my entire life, I just got an assistant, so I'm very excited about that. And I just got my first assistant. I've never had an assistant.
Okay.
So after...
whose name, by the way, is the same name as my daughter.
Oh, really?
Kara.
Oh, Kara, yeah, she's great. And Kara has been fantastic. I'm still in the process of figuring out how to
Best utilize her.
give up a lot of these things, because I'm a bit of a control freak, and I've done it myself. I've done all these things myself for 27 years that I've been working at Volk Packaging. And so to give up some of these things has been challenging, but she's terrific. She does a really great job. She's very good at saying, let me do that. Let me do that. So that's been really helpful. And I've been blessed with just a wonderful wife who I can't imagine getting through this without her. It's just been the best thing that ever happened to me. So, between that and not sleeping much, I try to get a lot done.
Sleep.
Yeah.
I vaguely recall what sleep was like.
Yeah. I figure I'll sleep when I'm dead.
We don't want to think about that.
Yeah. Well.
No, we don't want to think about that. But again, you wear a lot of hats. I know you're very much involved. I don't know all of your involvement, but I know you're very involved in the corporate community. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
Where are your fingers in the corporate community?
Well, so I own a corrugated box company called Volk Packaging.
Yep.
We're a manufacturer of corrugated boxes, third generation. It was started by my grandfather and my father in 1967. So we've been in business 52 years now. Then my uncle came on board. He worked there for 44 years and just recently retired. So now I own the company. For the first time, there's only one Volk owning the company, which is kind of weird because there's always been at least 2, if not 3 of us. My father retired in 2007. And I've tried to stay active in the community. At one point, I was much more active than I am now. Before my book came out, I was on like 5 different boards. I was on the board of the Manufacturers Association of Maine, the Maine Chamber of Commerce, blah, blah, blah. I can't even remember them all. But I was on a bunch of boards. And when the book came out, I said, we were on our way back, Dylan and I had a speaking gig in New York City. And Amy and I drove and met Dylan there. He was living in Austin, Texas at the time. And so he flew back and forth, but we drove. And on the way back, I said, I'm going to quit some of these boards. I can't, something's got to give. Like the wick is getting very close. Yep. And I remember Amy said, no, you're not. Because you suck at saying no, which I do. and because I'm a middle child, I want to please people. And she's right. It's something that I still work on today. It's hard. I have a hard time saying no to people. So I said, no, I really need to do it. I think I have to. And I did. I quit all the boards I was on.
I question your statement in regards to your reluctance. I think part of that reluctance is that you did not want to admit that you could not do all the things that you thought at one time you could do.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I would agree with that too. Yeah, I sometimes think that I can do everything, and I can't. And so I'm trying to focus on what's important, and that's what hiring an assistant has done. Kara has taken a lot off my plate, so I can focus on things that only I can do, things that are really important to me, and that's been great. But I still try to keep very active in the business community. I watch very closely what's happening in Augusta, even now that my wife is not in the legislature. When my wife was in the legislature, I really paid attention to everything. But it's still very important. What happens in Augusta impacts my business directly and impacts my customers, which impacts my business. So I pay a lot of attention to that. And we try to be a really good corporate citizen. We, last year, well, in 2000, I don't have the 2018 numbers yet, but in 2017, we donated to 107 different charities, and almost all local charities. That doesn't mean call me wherever the camera's on. But it's challenging because you want to be a good corporate citizen, but as more and more local companies get purchased, the pool of calling local companies and asking for money gets smaller and smaller.
If you're talking to me, Derek, you're preaching to the choir.
Oh, yeah?
Yes, because I have long maintained, back in the days of my career, I've long maintained that given an option of reasonable competitiveness, people will choose to do businesses with businesses that have a good social conscience.
Yeah,
a demonstrated good social conscience.
I would agree with that. And we want to be a good corporate citizen. We want to put back into the community. This community has been very good to us for 52 years. So we try to do good things for the community, and we support local little leagues and the project graduations and all those kinds of things. But it does get challenging because you do have to eventually say no. You can't say, you can't even believe how many, I literally get, not exaggerating, there's 252 work days in the year. I get well over 252 calls or letters or emails a year asking me for money. And I can't give to every one of them. And a lot of them are really good causes, but there's only so much we can do. And they feed on themselves. So like, you give to the local Biddeford Theater, and because they're your theater in the town that your business is in. And who goes to the theater, right? Other theater people. So the people from the Arundel Theater and the people from this theater and that theater, they go see other people's plays, and they go, oh look, Volk Packaging. When we need money, let's call them this. And then it just keeps growing and growing like that. Snowballs. So the last year or so, I've tried to funnel that down. We started our Heroes Wall, which I know we're going to talk about at some point.
Yes, we are.
And that's very important to me. And so I've been putting a lot of our corporate money into other veterans issues, which we're very passionate about, as well as autism organizations. So I'm trying to kind of streamline. And girls softball, which I'm also.
I know you, at one time you had a radio show.
I did, yeah. I just retired.
Which you no longer have.
Yeah.
That's one of the things you had to tweedle out.
That had to go. Yeah, that was a tough one, but I'm going to miss it, but it was the right thing to do.
Your interest in veteran issues, I share your interest. I'm not a veteran.
I'm not either.
However, I have had a series of shows on veterans.
Great.
And the challenges that they face. And I would invite you, anytime you have an issue relative to veteran, I'll make up a word. I'm good at making up words.
Okay.
Anytime you have a thought about veteranship that you want to tell people about,
okay,
you have an open invitation to do it on Issues That Matter.
Awesome.
Because that is a area that I am very much aware of. I'm very sensitive to it. I'm a believer in it. I've had veterans on. One of the shows that I remember, I had two veterans on, one from the Korean War and one from the Vietnam conflict.
Wow.
Comparing the differences between those two.
Oh, that would be interesting. Is that on YouTube?
And what's going on in the Middle East.
Oh, wow. I'll have to look for that.
And it was very interesting.
Yeah, that sounds interesting.
And I think it was very educational because people tend to pigeonhole, and they tend to put everything into one box.
Yeah.
And those conflicts, both the Vietnam conflict and the Korean War conflict, was so significantly different.
Oh, yeah.
But
Yeah, that's interesting.
let's talk about your wall.
Okay. So
Tell us about it.
all right, so outside of Volk Packaging is a 50-foot long, 7-foot tall wall, cement wall, dedicated to honoring heroes, honoring veterans who have served. They don't have to be deceased, they don't have to have served in a war, and they don't have to be from Biddeford, Saco. They can be from anywhere. We have somebody on there from Wisconsin. My uncle's on there. He lives in Hilton Head. They can be from anywhere. It doesn't matter. If there's someone that's important to you and you want to honor them, you can honor them on our Heroes Wall. So what it is, it's a 50-foot wall full of tiles, and each tile has a face if they want it. If they don't want the face, that's fine. Most of them have the face of the person, usually from their time in the service, and then whatever they want to put on there with it. Some people put on just something like, the years they served, Vietnam, that's it. Some people put whole stories. Of course, the more words you put on, the smaller the photo. But basically, you can put whatever you want. If you go to our Facebook page, which is, go to Facebook and go to VPC Heroes Wall, you'll find there's a tab and it shows a whole bunch of the tiles. So you can get a feel for what people put on them. Or come over and see it. It's open 24/7. It's lit. We have it lit up.
I've been there. I've seen it.
We're snow blowing it all winter long. It has lights, so it's open 24/7. We have a parking spot dedicated to it, so no employee can park there. It's only for people that come visit the wall, and we want to fill it so we can start another one. And it'll hold when we're done. It'll hold 700 veterans. And then there's also space for corporate tiles. So if somebody wants to be a corporate sponsor, they can be a corporate sponsor and help support it. All the money, 100% of the money, every penny that we raise through this Heroes Wall goes to the Biddeford, Saco, Old Orchard Beach VFW. So the only money that I have to spend on the wall is I have to buy the tiles. And I buy those from a company in South Portland called Get Etched. They're fantastic. They do a great job with the tiles. They look beautiful. And Compose a Tile puts all the tiles up for free, which has been incredible. I mean, I don't know how much that would have cost me. Landry French, company in Scarborough, built the entire wall at no cost, which I was not expecting. It's got 4-foot foundation with rebar. I mean, this wall is never going anywhere. And so the companies that have stepped up have been incredible. But we do need more corporate sponsors. And so far we've donated just under $21,000 to the Biddeford, Saco, Old Orchard Beach VFW. And we're hoping that number grows significantly over the next couple of years as we grow the wall.
Well, we mentioned earlier about how things are set. These plans are set someplace else.
Yeah.
They come from above.
Yep.
Interestingly, yesterday I donated platelets.
You did?
I
donate platelets. I was there on Saturday.
I was there yesterday.
That's funny.
And
donate platelets, whatever camera we're looking at. People, I tell people about it all the time, and nobody has ever. Every time I go, I do a Facebook video trying to guilt people into coming and donating platelets. I used to try to encourage them. Now I just try to guilt them.
Well, yesterday was my first time donating platelets.
Oh, it is? Oh, good for you.
I've always been a blood donor.
Yeah.
But yesterday was my first time donating platelets.
Good for you.
And somebody had mentioned to me that the process takes 3 hours. So I imagine me sitting in their chair for 3 hours with one thing in my arm.
Yeah.
Taking the blood out or doing whatever needs to get done. And I was going to read your book.
Oh, yeah. That doesn't work.
Well, guess what?
Doesn't work that way.
Didn't work that way.
2 arms.
But that's right. And they say, well, you're not going to read the book. But we have a room full of videos that you can watch.
Yeah.
So what do? I go into the room full of videos and I pull out a DVD Flags of Our Fathers.
Oh, that's a great book. A great movie, but
Yes.
also a great book.
And what are we talking about now? We're talking about veterans.
Yeah,
Everything is tied in.
yeah,
There is a link,
that's great.
and the puppeteer is above.
Yeah,
And it's just it's and when I think about it, it blows my mind.
yeah, yeah. Well, good for you for donating platelets. That's terrific. I hope you do it again. I've been
I
doing
will.
it for 25 years.
You treat it like royalty.
Yeah,
I mean, I had chocolate chip cookies enough chocolate chip cookies to put more weight on me.
yeah. You literally saved somebody's life. Just don't make sure you don't drink a lot before you go, because you can't get up for that whole time.
No, you can't.
So you got to make sure
And that was
don't
a surprise.
drink any water before you go.
He said, when I said I have a book to read, he said, "Oh no, you're not going to read the book. Your arm's going to be strapped down."
Yeah, yeah. But no, I mean, cancer patients can take up to sometimes 14 or 20, whatever it is,
Yep.
units of platelets a day. So think about that, 20 units of platelets in one day. That means somebody had to sit there for 40 hours. People had to sit for 40 hours to get that person 1 day's worth of, and platelets only last for 3 or 4 days. So the platelets that you donated will be in somebody in the next day or so.
And they already know where they're going to go.
Yeah, and I actually started donating platelets in 1994 when I went into a customer in Rockport, Maine, called Elfin Music. They're not in business anymore. Well, they moved to Florida, maybe they are. And she said, I walked in, I was 24 years old, and brand new to sales, and she said, "Have you ever donated platelets?" And I said, "No, I don't even know what that is." She said, "Go to the Red Cross, donate platelets, and then come talk to me." And I was like, okay. And I went, I donated platelets, I went back, I got all the business. And so I literally bled for a customer. How many people can say that? And I've been doing it ever since. So I've been doing it, I've been doing it for 25 years now. And it's something that's really important. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, you've been a wonderful guest, and I want you on the show again.
All right.
Okay, so let's have this be the first show of a series of shows.
Sounds
You've got
good.
a lot, I'm sure you've got a lot more to talk about.
I got a lot to say, as you probably can tell.
Well,
I'm not shy.
I kind of get that impression. Right now, it may be faint, but the more I hear you, I think the more I'm going to get that impression.
Yeah.
In any event, thank you very much.
Thanks
for being
a lot.
guest.
I appreciate it.
I
Thanks for having me on the
appreciate
show.
having you here. And you and I do share a lot of common thought.
Yeah, it's been great getting to know you.
So, folks, I think it was a great show. In fact, darn it, I'm going to say it. I know it was a great show. Derek has given us great information on something that is very critical to a lot of people. And just viewing the show and developing understanding is helping the overall situation. With that, I will say to you goodbye. Have a great weekend. And we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.